I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 47, where we're going to talk about why people are leaving the church. And I'm going to say we don't have original research. I sent you an article from Medium that was an article reprinted from a Baptist news organization that got their data from, I believe, Pew.
Yeah.
So,
and it was 1,200 people were...
1,200 deconstructs / deconverts were asked what was the catalyst that started it.
Right. Yeah, this is going to be, I think, a really, really good episode.
Yeah, hopefully. Before we start, though, we're in person, so hooray.
Yay.
And we have new coffee.
Yes, it's Terra Nova Guatemala from Keene, New Hampshire, which is about 20 miles down the road from where I live in Brattleboro, Vermont, and it's one of my favorite coffees on the planet. So I should say Terra Nova is one of my favorite roasting companies on the planet. The particular roast that is Guatemala, I'm not sure. I really haven't tasted all their roasts or compared it to be able to say that, but I do like this flavor profile.
Yeah, I like it as well.
It's dark and chocolatey, and
I was going to say it's chocolatey.
Yeah. So I don't think I made it very French pressy.
I only French press it, so I don't know what that means.
Well,
I sometimes cold brew, but
we always do French press for the podcasts, and you have a knack for, and it's probably not even intentional. But you have. I think maybe just because you're a cook, I don't know what it is, but you have a knack for. There's a certain, like, when I say French press, like, there's a certain. I could tell if you gave me 3 coffees and one was made on French press, one was made on a regular drip, and one was made like a pour over, and one was made on Chemex. So now I'm like 4. I could tell the difference between the two. But like your French press is not as obvious as mine is. Like I drink this, I'm like, oh yeah, this is very, very French pressy.
Like stronger?
Like grainier?
Oh yeah, because the screen doesn't get every.
Yeah. So because I make it like proper, I think, and yours is just like more intuitive. You're just
yeah. I mean, I've also like French press has been my go-to for at least 6 years, simply because in the morning, it started when I worked at Smith College, and my shifts were 6 a.m. sometimes, and like I didn't want to get up and do a pour over or a drip,
right?
And so like I could put the coffee in the French press it, hop in the shower, and
right.
So I just think having done it for so long is probably...
Yeah. So,
but I'll take the compliment.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's 8.5.
Yeah, I'd give it an 8.3.
Yeah.
I like the other Terra Nova blend that you brought way back, like episode 4 better.
Yeah, was that the Brazil?
Do
you remember?
No.
They're Brazil.
That sounds right, though.
It tastes like a Reese's peanut butter cup. It's fantastic.
Yeah. That's been my favorite coffee so far.
Yeah.
That and the Mary Lou's.
The Mary Lou's was awful.
Yeah.
It was a disappointment.
I threw the whole thing out.
The whole thing?
The whole bag.
We just had
after
that
the
one.
episode, that was it.
Yeah. I do pour over at home.
Yeah.
So, when I have time.
Yeah.
But when I have a French press, too, for when I don't have as much time.
Yeah. Yeah, because to do pour over right, you really need to, like, be there.
Well, I have a hand grinder, too.
So, we need to set you up with a little coffee bar.
It's ridiculous, but once it becomes part of your routine, you forget how ridiculous it is until you tell other people, and then you say it out loud, and you're like, it takes me 15 minutes to make a cup of coffee in the morning, and I'm there for every step. It's not like It's not like I put a whole pot on and walk away and then come back 15 minutes later. Like, I literally am working on coffee for 15 minutes. Grinding and pouring and all that stuff. But I make a mean...
I mean, it's a recipe. And the more care and attention you put in, the better product you're going to have at the end. I believe that with any food item.
It's such a delight to, like, when I have guests, you know, at first they're like, where's my cup of coffee? Because they're used to...
Right.
Most of them actually have Keurigs, which is just like they don't even think about it, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's such a delight when I give them that cup that I put all that effort into, and they're like, I didn't know that coffee could be like delicious.
Yeah, it feels, from your description, much more like how the British and the Japanese go about tea.
Right.
Like, it's not just to get the caffeine, but it's about ritual, it's about meditation, it's about being present.
Yeah.
Or even just taking a break, right? Like, we're not going to rush this tea. We're going to have tea time. It's going to be proper. We're going to sort of pause our lives.
Yeah. It's not just to have something in our hand while we talk, but it's also part of the occasion.
Yeah.
For the reason that we're gathering. So,
well, before we turn the whole episode into best coffee practices, so the Medium article.
Yeah, you sent me an article earlier in the week. They interviewed 1,200 deconstructs/deconverts about why they were deconstructing their conservative evangelical. I think, or maybe was it Christianity in general?
I think it was probably having the article originally be from a Baptist news.
Yeah,
my guess is it's much more toward the conservative evangelical.
Yep. That was my impression too. So, like, why are you deconstructing or deconverting? What were the main reasons?
Yeah. And
then I think the guy that wrote the article, he gave some of his take on it. I can't really. Maybe you remember. I don't actually remember what his slant or what his bias was, or what he was saying. But do you want to give a quick rundown of the findings?
Yeah, well, just real quick. I think his bias was definitely more in my camp.
Okay, yeah.
Now, the Baptist Press article, which I'll try to link in the show notes, they pretty much said the same thing, but then had a rebuttal / why this is bad after each thing.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like, part of it, at the end of the article anyway, they were like, this is bad because people are going to lose community and they don't hang out with their church friends anymore, and that's bad for people because of this. And
right, mental health kind of stuff.
So their slant was definitely more, these reasons should be looked at, but it's better to not deconvert because there's so much more stuff that the church has to offer than these pet issues.
Especially if they correct their opinions about these. I
don't think the Baptists would at least correct their opinion on the first one.
Right.
So yeah, the big four that the article gave were the way the church treats LGBTQIA.
That was number
people.
one.
That was number one, and it was pretty large as a catalyst. So, a lot of the deconverts were saying that they felt that the church was bigoted, that was hateful, that they weren't able to properly love their queer friends in a way that they wanted to as a human because of church doctrine. And yeah, I have a little parentheses note that says recently Kentucky, and I don't know if you know about that or not, but we that can be a footnote. The second is behavior of Christians. They actually said that they felt the people in their church and in their community that identified as Christians had worse behavior than those who didn't. And for a lot of them, Trump was the last straw. That they were looking at this man who had multiple affairs, who paid a porn star to have sex with him while his wife was pregnant, and saying, like, how can we justify this within Christianity? The third was a freedom. They felt that the church didn't allow to be authentic, to love others as they wanted to love. Again, sort of related to the LGBT community. But they said that as they were leaving, the dogma, the rules, you can't wear skirts that are this short, or you shouldn't wear bikinis, or, whatever the issue is. They felt there was more freedom outside of the church. And then the final one, which is a small percent, it was like 7%, was intellectual. And those would be people like me who went to seminary, started asking questions, started reading outside the approved seminary material, and came out on the other side saying this I believe it's a fairy tale and not historical, and therefore not something I should follow anymore.
Yeah. So the fact that number one reason was bigotry towards or hatred towards LGBTQ, which my conservative evangelical friends, if they're still listening, would hate that I just said hatred. There's a like a definition problem there that might be interesting to talk about, but the fact that the treatment of LGBTQ is number one is not at all surprising to me.
Yeah.
If somebody that comes from that world is a reason why people would leave. I remember, however, in seminary, this would be circa 2007, 2006, being warned about that particular thing being a thing that the church was going to have to deal with, and the presumption being homosexuality, transgenderism, queerness, non-binary, all of that's sinful. That's the presumption. That was the presumption of my seminary. So, and then once people started leaving and citing that as one of the reasons, the rebuttal of the people who stayed on the conservative side of the fence, if you will, was, well, they just want to fit in. They just want to be cool. And I think
just they are the evangelicals.
Yeah,
the
the deconstructs just want to be cool, which, you know, it obviously is a manipulative argument, but at the same time, it's like, if we're not playing semantics, what they kind of called it in like 06 and 07. It did actually end up being the issue.
Yeah,
I don't think it's because people, though, wanted to be hip or wanted to be cool,
right,
or wanted to be accepted. I think it's because they genuinely felt like they had to make a choice between loving their LGBTQ friends and being a Christian.
Yeah, or at least part of a church that doesn't.
Right.
You know, and you know, it's fun. Just thinking about like how you were like, these people wouldn't say that they hate gay people, queer people, transgender people. They'd say that they love them and they want to point out their sin to bring them to God. Mm-hmm. And I think what my rebuttal to that would be, if the person who you're quote unquote loving says your love feels very much like hate and very much like discrimination and very much like you don't see me or hear me, then I think the person who's saying they love needs to really look back at themselves.
That's gonna be a non-starter. Like that.
Yeah.
That's a categorical. That's a seismic categorical difference. In other words, like when you come across fundamentalist Christians, you're always going to come at the end of the day to the Bible defines what love is. Not how you feel, not what your rationality says, not whatever opinions you've come to from your own heart and mind, but the Bible defines what love is, and it's unloving to tell people who are sinning that they're not sinning.
It's true.
And that's what can you say to that? Except, well, then your Bible is bigoted.
Yeah.
You know, like there's hardly a conversation to be had from that point. And I think that's why in the recent years you've seen such a sort of hard split. They're like, there's no middle ground. You're either a progressive Christian who is open and affirming and openly open and affirming, or you're a conservative Christian who now is emboldened to be very vocal about their anti-homosexuality.
Yeah,
in the name of love, by the way. Like this is us being loving.
Yeah, I know. Some of my evangelical seminary professors who I'm still Facebook friends, like one of them was a drag queen reading locally to, story time, and he felt the need to do like a Christian reading in the room next to them, and was like, I'm really praying that there isn't a confrontation. I'm like, you're going to start a confrontation.
Right.
Like, you couldn't do it a different day or a different place and let people who wanted to hear your Jesus Storybook Bible reading decide to go. But, like, you really have to do it right next to this other event, like, and then say I'm praying off. No, you are praying for a confrontation, and then what you want to do is say, see, these drag queens are so bigoted, they wouldn't even let me read the Bible,
right?
And you're like, but you are invading their space,
right?
And it's just,
and they might say that they were invading our space first because they came to this school without the parents' permission, to which the rebuttal...
Well, but it wasn't a school. It was like a...
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this is the South. They weren't inviting drag queens to a school.
Yeah.
Like, this was like a town hall meeting room.
Oh, okay.
It was like one of those places that anyone in the town can rent for like $25 to have your little function.
I see.
And this professor decided to rent the next room over as well.
Well, this is the world that we live in. Because I'm pretty sure if there was a reading at the public library by some church, this is in Brattleboro.
Yeah.
Like if some church in Brattleboro, this is hypothetical, not that this happened, but the library allowed them to do storybook time about how Noah's Ark was a literal event that happened, then I could see there being a group of 4 or 5 passive-aggressive hippie moms that would, that would go to the library that day and read a counter-narrative.
Do you think so? Really?
I do.
Because when I stopped being a pastor 8 years ago-ish? 8 to 10 years ago. Anyway, Vita Nova, we helped out with the Christmas tree lighting, holiday lights, the Merry Maple is what they call it in Amherst. And we did the kids section, and they were more than happy to let us hand out some Piper books, some Keller books that we got for free. Like, very progressive Amherst didn't care. They just didn't take the books, or the ones who did, like some people had questions. Like we did the town Easter egg hunt. The town hadn't had an Easter egg hunt until we did it.
Yeah.
Nobody was upset about any of the things that we were doing.
I guess that's why I used the specific analogy that I used, because and maybe this is why it breaks down altogether, but like, I don't think that non-Christians I think they presume the best in content about what they don't know, like Keller and Piper. They don't probably have an idea. I remember in my early days in Brattleboro, well, there's as a pastor there's I'm sure most people know about it. It's a anti-abortion, pro-life organization known as CareNet. Most towns have them. They're basically like an alternative to Planned Parenthood. So they're trying to counsel women against getting abortions and counsel them through their pregnancies. They're all independently run, but there's a centralized structure. Anyway, for outreach reasons, the one in Brattleboro changed its name from CareNet to Branches Pregnancy Center, so that it wasn't loaded with pro-life connotations, even though it was totally pro-life. Anyway, so it was one day there were people going around handing out flyers for Branches, and all it said on the flyers was that they were a pregnancy center. And most of the business owners at Brattleboro were like, yeah. I don't think they thought twice about it until there was this one lady who happened to know. Yeah. She happened to know what Branches was about, that it was CareNet. And she started walking around the streets telling business owners in the middle of the day, do not accept these flyers from these people. These people are the devil, essentially. I don't know what the words that she used. And so all the business owners just started like stripping off the Branches flyers from. They're like, oh, I didn't know. I say that to say it. Like I curated my analogy about Noah's Ark for that reason, because I think that Christians can get away with things if they're subtle.
Yeah.
But if they're open and honest, they're not going to get away with much in a extremely progressive culture. And I think that post-Trump conservative Christians kind of realized that.
Yeah.
That they weren't going to win the world by trying to forge a middle ground or being subtle or coming through the back door. And so I've seen, at least nationally, Christians just being like, hey, if you could call it bigoted, the Bible says it. Oh, excuse me. You can call it bigoted. The Bible says it's love. We don't care.
Yeah.
Here's the truth.
Yeah.
So that's sort of polarizing, is what I've seen. And then there's an infighting within Christianity because you still have that sort of side that wants to do more middle ground and like, hey, let's be winsome. Let's be like likable. Let's not just shove this stuff in their face. And then, of course, there's always the progressive Christians that are just like, actually, if you're not open and affirming, then you're not following Jesus or the way of Jesus.
The winsome people have lost.
It would
some
seem
of my
so.
old Acts 29 friends who, again, left Acts 29 because it's not conservative enough. Okay. So just want to...
Yeah.
They are over Keller and all the, they're basically like, winsome lost, just got to declare the truth, and they're also Calvinists, right? So people aren't going to convert unless the Holy Spirit changes their heart anyway, and the way that happens is through preaching, right? So you just tell them the gospel, tell them that they're evil, not just for being gay, but for being a glut. Like, everyone's evil.
Right.
And the Holy Spirit will change some people's hearts to respond to it, and the others were predestined to burn in hell forever anyway, so what's it matter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing that the last few years in this polarizing political culture atmosphere that we're in, that I've been thinking about, you just said winsomeness loses, but also, like, I'm not even sure anymore if winsomeness isn't dishonest.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of Keller, he's pretty honest.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, he tries to soften the blow, so to speak, or not even misdirect, but like affirm traditional Christian doctrine, but also give room for someone to feel heard. Mm-hmm. I can't really think of many others besides him who do that.
I agree. He's not allowed to. He was disallowed from speaking at Princeton.
Oh yeah,
which is a
progressive.
It's an Ivy League school, but a lot of these Ivy League schools have their roots in,
I think, all of them
as seminaries. No, I think some of them. I don't know. Some of them don't. I could be wrong about that. Some of them are non-denominational.
Yeah.
But they all have their roots in Christianity.
Yeah.
And I think Dartmouth's non-denominational and Brown is Baptist, but Princeton happens to be Presbyterian, which is what Keller is.
Yeah.
Now, there's two kinds of Presbyterians. There's the mainline Presbyterian.
PCUSA.
Yes. And then there's Keller's brand, which is more conservative, which is called the PCA. But he's still a Presbyterian, and those two factions are trying to like each other more, I think. Maybe not today. But point being, they invited this conservative PCA guy, Keller, to come speak, and they found out his stance on homosexuality, and he disinvited him.
Yeah.
And the talk wasn't even about sexuality.
Right.
But it was just like, no, it's a
non-starter for
that's a non-starter for us. So, I guess the point that I was making there was Keller is somebody that one person can say is a bigot, and then somebody in Acts 29 can say is a compromiser.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here asking, is he dishonest? Him in particular, no, I don't think he is. I think he's saying things that, if you're a progressive, they're bigoted. He's saying bigoted things in a nice way. I think that's the perspective.
Yeah.
If you're a hardline progressive. And I think if you're a hardline fundamentalist, you're saying he's skirting the truth because he's trying to look cool.
Yeah.
I don't think either of those things are true, actually, but I didn't
But that's why he's lost.
Yeah.
Right. I do think, as far as LGBTQIA stuff go, I think a lot of the people in the article who left, it wasn't even necessarily the doctrine, because they can understand intellectually or whatever that this is the doctrine of the church. I think a lot of it was having to do with outward actions that were specifically targeting these minority groups. So, there's one thing to say within our church, this is what we believe. We do believe you're a sinner. We also believe everyone's a sinner, right? But it seems like the church has picked up on this very particular sin and wants to do everything it can do to stop it. Like you can stop someone's sexuality
Yeah.
right? And so, I believe if the Trump conservative evangelicals had their way, we would go back to where homosexuality was illegal, classified as a mental illness, and you could get locked up for being gay.
Yeah, agreed. I think they might protest that, but I agree with you. I think that is a slippery
I don't think
slope.
they would protest it. I mean, so we talked about Kentucky. Yesterday, the legislature overrode the governor's veto to make any transgender care illegal. So schools no longer have to use someone's chosen pronouns. There is no gender affirming care allowed to anyone who's under 18. No puberty blockers. And it's just a blatant, we don't like who you are or what you're doing, so we're going to legislate that you can't do it.
Yeah. So when you sent me the article, I said I was probably going to play devil's advocate at some point.
Yeah.
And I feel obliged to comment that I'm playing devil's advocate before I do.
Yeah.
So that people don't label me a bigot, which might not work anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that you could make those same arguments on libertarian grounds. And they wouldn't have to be necessarily religious, or you might...
So what's the libertarian grounds to say that an individual person can't seek the type of medical care that they want, though?
In other words, somebody might say, I don't want to be forced to have my... we're talking about schools, right?
Well, no, they outlawed all gender-affirming healthcare as well.
Okay, never mind. Let me go back. I need to listen better.
So until you're 18, you're not allowed any gender-affirming care. So you can't have puberty blockers. You can't have, psychiatrists can't encourage you to wear the kind of clothes that you feel comfortable in, even though Jesus wore dresses, toga, but definitely didn't wear pants.
Yeah.
And in Scotland, women wore the pants and men wore the kilts because it was easier in battle to be looser, and you could moon your right. So which is also clothes are so cultural,
right?
And I'm like, why? Who cares if a 7-year-old wants to wear a dress if they have a penis, or a girl wants to wear pants? Which, by the way, was a big deal in the 50s, right? Like women didn't wear pants,
right?
And it was a whole culture fight, and enough women were like, no, pants are nice because I don't get wind up my whatever, and men trying to look at my underwear. Mm-hmm. A little bit of a tangent, but so in Kentucky now it is illegal to do those things.
Right. Okay. So could you make that argument on not that it would be the correct argument, but again, playing devil's advocate, you could make the argument on the ground that all that stuff leads to more gender confusion, that it's psychologically harmful for minors, and that it's best to just stay with the cultural norms until a child is an adult, and then they can make, as a free adult, they can make the decisions about, cross-cultural gendering, regendering,
So I think the problem with that is science. And people are going to get mad, but 2% of people don't have XX or XY chromosomes. Mm-hmm. They have different what we would consider sexual gene pairings. Also, the science is pretty clear that it's not just XX and XY that determine sex, sexuality, and gender. We used to believe that, but it turns out the human genome is far more complicated, and there's multiple genes that determine your sex. There are people who have XY chromosomes who have ovaries, people have XX chromosomes that have testes. So I think, especially like it's Kentucky, right? It's where the Bible Belt buckles. Uh-huh. These conservatives aren't coming at it from the libertarian perspective. They're coming at it from the Bible says there's Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and that's that. And like, this is something that I used to not be passionate about because I didn't think it affected me, but I have come to a place where I'm more of a, like, I need to be an anti-racist when it comes to LGBTQIA issues. Mm-hmm. As far as waiting till they're 18, something like 99% of youth who identify as a different gender than their birth certificate never go back to that gender that their birth certificate says. So it's a very small percentage of people who retransition back to their birth sex, mm-hmm. or birth gender. And puberty blockers, the second you stop taking them, you go through puberty. So it's not this permanent damage. It's actually no damage at all, except that it stops, people who are identified as male at birth from getting an Adam's apple, or people who are identified from female from growing breasts until they stop taking the blockers. Mm-hmm. So there really isn't the same ability to transition in the same way later on if you've gone through puberty and you're an adult. Mm-hmm. And I think all the studies show that transgender people have the highest rate of suicide, the highest rate of attacks on them, of assault. And they've found that the earlier that people who identify as a gender are allowed to be that gender, the less mental health issues they have. And I think this is where these Christians who deconvert are coming from. They're looking at legislatures and judges, and they're saying, just let these people be. Like, is it really harmful if I want to be called a she, or a they, or a zai? Like, how does that hurt you in any way? And I think they're looking at these issues and these pushes to legislate morality, and they're saying, I'm done. Like, I don't care if my neighbor wears a dress or pants or sleeps with, like, I don't care who they sleep with, so long as it's, not a minor. Like, just let them be. And I think that's the libertarian stance too, in my opinion. Like libertarians, like, you want to do heroin, right. Just don't rob me. Right.
Yeah, I'm done playing.
Yeah, sorry, I know I dropped, like...
I'm done playing devil's advocate. The reason being is because, mostly because, you mentioned that this is an area that's, personal to you, and I want to be respectful of that and careful of that, and don't want to turn it into.
I mean, I'm okay with people playing devil's advocate. I'm okay with people having different opinions.
Yeah. Where
I get fired up is where those people with different opinions want to make their opinions the only one that's allowed in the public square.
Yeah.
Through laws.
Yeah. I think I don't know what to say. There's a common sense sort of, and this is devil's advocate again. Yeah. It's like maybe it's not completely devil's advocate. Like, I recognize when you talk about puberty blockers. My kids are 10, 7, and 5. When you talk about these kinds of things, puberty blockers and dressing up, and not so much that, but particularly when it gets into medication and pharmaceuticals, and my gut, my instinct, maybe just because it's new, mm-hmm. maybe just because it's not familiar, but my gut is like, you're messing with biology. You're messing with the biology of minors.
So does Ritalin, though.
Right.
So does lithium.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But it's not exactly the same. It's just because we're talking about identity issues. I'm just talking about a medical,
Right.
about diseases or a health issue.
But it is a health issue, potentially, right? It's a mental health issue.
It's potentially a mental health issue, which has a lot to do with, and I wonder how much to do with, well, it comes down to parents. We're talking about legislation and we're talking about government. But what it comes down to, I think, is the conversations that happen at home about not just gender, but what makes you valuable as a person.
Yeah.
And I don't as a parent, this is going to sound defensive or and I don't mean it to, because I think my goal, and hopefully everybody's goal as a parent, is to provide a home for childhood and adolescence that nurtures a child to become a mentally healthy adult. And so one of the things that are going to come up is, obviously you have to talk to your kids about sexuality. You have to talk to your kids about gender. You have to talk to your kids about puberty and all that kind of stuff, and identity. And what would feel wrong to me on the one side of the spectrum is this insistence that because you have a penis or because you have a vagina, this and this and this is not available to you in life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you have a penis, you can't ever wear a dress. You can't ever do these things that are considered feminine, which is clearly cultural and contextual. That wouldn't be the way I'd want to construct that conversation. And I think that there are probably homes all across this country, in the South and in Middle America, because of what they feel like is there is this pressure to think about gender in a different way, that they're going to react to that by saying, more than ever, more than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, whereas 10 years ago, I feel like people would have been like, there would have been like moderately conservative Christians who would be like, if my boy wants to, if he's not into sports, that's okay. I could imagine a scenario now where it's like, my boy will be into sports, because that's a way that we're defending ourselves against this onslaught of genderism. But like on the other side, I feel like this is anecdotal and from my personal experience, that there is an ideology on the other side about gender in particular that I don't know. I wonder, and I'm saying I don't know. I wonder. Here's what I want. I want to make sure that if there is gender dysphoria, that it comes dysmorphia. Thank you. that it isn't introduced by the parent or the adult. That it isn't it isn't the psychology of suggestion.
Yeah, I think the science is pretty clear, like the actual science, that it's not. And I can send you multiple, like if you're actually interested in learning, I have lots of resources. But let's pretend that it is introduced by the parents. Should we also say that they shouldn't introduce religion? That they shouldn't introduce this other worldview that says there are only the binary?
Good question.
Right?
That's what I was trying to say. That was the framework I was...
Yeah. I mean, I think I also want to just introduce the concept that it's really only the Abrahamic traditions that have this binary. Even today in Hinduism, which has 1 billion followers, it's not a small religion, they have a third gender. The Roman Empire, the pagan traditions had the Native Americans had a third gender, and those people were actually revered because they believed they possessed the qualities of both genders. So for a lot of human history, there were cultures like the one that I hope America becomes that say, hey, we see you. You don't fit into traditional male, traditional female. You're another way. Cool. You know?
Do you think there's a binary in terms of reproduction?
So like I said, there are people with XY chromosomes. So that would be male, present as male, and have ovaries. So that alone has to destroy the binary, right?
No, not the way I'm asking the question.
Okay.
I'm
I totally derailed this into a conversation of...
Yeah. No, I'm saying, like, if we could find a binary somewhere that we all mutually agree on as a culture, then I feel like that could be a way forward. In other words, there's ovaries and there's testes.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't have anything to do with whether or not a kid plays baseball or does ballet, and they don't have anything to do with whether they present male or female, and that those terms are those terms male and female are, or man and woman, let's say it that way, are subjective, and that there aren't any cultural expectations attached to any of those. Yada yada yada, on and down the line. But at the end of the day, here's how humans get made. Here's how mammals get made. One person has testes and provides sperm, and the other person has ovaries and eggs, and those two meet, and those are the two kinds of people that there are. Yeah. So we all agree that there are two kinds of people. At least we can agree on that. That's
so potentially for humans, except they just use 2 sperm in mice to create a mouse that has no egg. They've used 2 eggs before to produce other animals. Also, it's pretty particular to humans that there's only one thing that produces sperm and one thing that produces eggs. In the animal world, in the non-human, higher-level mammalian world, especially in what we would consider lower life forms, amphibians, fish, reptiles, there's all crazy types of ways to reproduce. Like, there's asexual. There are sea slugs that can get themselves pregnant, not just like cloning, but actually absorb other chromosomes from other sea slugs, and not in a sperm way. Just like take them into their own DNA and then impregnate themselves with it. There's fish that have the ability to make sperm, and all of a sudden there's no fish with the ability to make eggs, and they change their sex.
Yeah. I mean,
so you want to talk about fluid sexuality?
I don't think. I think it's fluid sexuality has been. I remember learning about that kind of stuff in school.
Yeah.
That the way humans reproduce isn't necessarily the way other organisms do. I think everybody recognizes that.
I think I can concede to your point.
Yeah.
And so, like, yes, there are males who identify as male who have the ability to make sperm, and there are other people, females, who have the ability to make eggs. And the way we make humans is the egg makers and the sperm makers come together, and they share their DNA, and that's
right.
But, why do Christians have to make that the hill that they're dying upon, and just instead of saying, well, there's these other people who can't reproduce in the traditional way, but that's fine. I mean, there are also women who are infertile and can't reproduce in the traditional way, and we have in vitro fertilization, or men who can't produce sperm or get erect in the traditional way, and we have Viagra and
yeah. Well, you saying that might get us back on track. So
for the 3 minutes we have left.
Me doing devil's advocate again for the 3 minutes that we have left. You said why is that a hill to die on for Christians? It goes back to what I said at the very beginning, which is because the Bible says, and how much of a non-starter that is. But it's not just because the Bible says. It's because the psychology of this is what the Bible says is a thing. It's a cultural thing. It is a historical mass, you would say, delusion. But, and I might say so too, but I'm merely recognizing that, like, it's a mythos.
Yeah.
It's a myth. It's like a collective gluten. this so it feels like it actually isn't, I don't think, at its bottom really about, maybe it is for certain individuals, but as a collective, I don't think it's about fear of the new or being grossed out. I think maybe some of that's mingled in there, which is why these people find each other, because I think there's something. Some people are conservative; they just are by disposition. But I think it's about this collective worldview that everybody's tacitly or sometimes actually physically agreed to agree on. It's the fear of being outside the group.
Yeah.
It's the fear of not being who you thought you were. Of having to, because there really are high stakes in this issue. So you say, why is it such a hill to die on? It's because if I don't do everything I can to justify this binary, traditionalist, Abrahamic view of sexuality, if I don't do everything to justify that, logically, rationally, biblically, then I'm not me anymore. Now I've got to be a progressive liberal activist. So the stakes are super high, I think.
I guess what I mean by hill to die on, though, is like, just leave people alone. Like, I'm not out there trying to write legislation to make sure people don't become Christians, or say you're abusing your child if you teach them about hell, which is like, right? I'm like, whatever, dude. I think you're wrong. I would love for you to change your mind. I might work, on Facebook and like social activism to help you leave what I think is, a cult. But I'm not going to tell you that you can't believe it.
There needs to be a part 2 on this episode. I'm serious. Like, yeah, because that angle too is like, I think you could make a really compelling argument that teaching kids that they're going to hell if they don't believe the gospel should be illegal. I think you could make an actual case that that's psychologically harmful.
I think it is psychologically harmful.
And therefore, it should be a law that's abuse, except punching your kid in the face is abuse.
Except we do have freedom of religion and speech, and I think that's part of that's foundational to America. And I don't want to be a Marxist where we force everyone to be atheists, because I don't think that. I think it's much more effective to winsomely persuade individuals one by one. So to circle back to why people are leaving, I think they're leaving for the exact, not the necessarily transgender affirming that I'm doing and I believe, but they're leaving because they're like, why can't we just leave people alone? They're like, because we're Christians aren't, evangelical conservative Christians aren't waging a war against saturated fat, against obesity, against, laziness. I guess maybe sometimes laziness because they hate welfare. But, they're not waging a war against gluttony, against wrath, against malice, against anger, right? In fact, they sometimes celebrate these other sins.
Yeah.
How many fat Baptist preachers have you known in your life?
Well, it's one of those things that's like talked about in the circles and then nobody ever does anything about it.
Yeah.
It is a thing that people bring up a lot.
I mean, Mark Driscoll, before he imploded, one of his things was like, Acts 29 allowed people to have alcohol in moderation. And the Baptist we're like, you shouldn't drink that. And he's like, well, you shouldn't drink gravy. What's your point?
Right.
Like, one of them is listed as a sin, the other isn't.
Right.
and so, like, just leave them alone. You believe that it's wrong. Try to convince them in one-on-one conversations and dialogue.
Yeah.
But, like, do we need legislation? Do we need to set up next to the drag event and hope and pray there's no confrontation? Like, do it the next day. Do it on the other side of town. Like, don't actively provoke these people who have a different worldview, because I think from what I read in the article, that's what these people who are leaving the faith don't see as love.
Right. So this definitely needs to be a 2-part episode. Maybe this can be the cliffhanger. What I'll say to that is that I don't think you said, why are they going after LGBTQ and not obesity? Because they don't feel like there's a pro-obesity ideology that's coming after them. They don't feel like they're under attack by those other things. I think there's a clear difference of perception, and I actually think it's human nature, where what you have are both parties thinking they're the ones under attack. Both parties thinking the other one is the aggressor. It's the classic, there's a fight in the gym and the gym teacher comes over and tries to break up the fight. And both kids say what? They started it. He started it. And maybe we could get to the bottom of it, like who started it. Maybe that's irrelevant. What I'm saying is like that, and I don't know if you could go back to who started it, but I have lots of thoughts about why conservatives, the way that they perceive the whole political issue, and also my experience with progressives being what it is. So that's what I'll say about that for now.
Yeah, I mean, I know we said let's leave it on a cliffhanger, but I think the who started it, it wasn't Christians in Stonewall that were getting beaten by police. It wasn't.
Yeah.
Now, maybe 2,000 years ago, there were Christians getting eaten by lions. That's not our culture.
Agreed.
And, it wasn't Christians who were being chemically castrated in the 40s for wanting to have sex with people of the same sexuality/gender.
Right.
So I think ultimately what they're afraid of is losing power. And they've realized that they're starting. So 15 years ago, the attack was on gay marriage. Right? They lost that. I don't hear any Christians, most Christians railing against, like they lost. But so they're leaving that. And now they're on to transgender.
But the language between Christians is never, guys, we have to go out and attack this.
Right. No, I believe that they believe they're under attack.
Right.
And I would say partially their worldview is, but it's not by the LGBTQIA who wants to destroy their religion. I think the culture is under attack by that group, but also me and others who are like, this ideology is harmful and we want to change it. And we're saying you can be who you want to be, but stop trying to bully others into being who you want them to be.
Yeah. Yeah, you say that they're not under attack, and I believe you based on the conversation that we had today, which is you're not even willing to tell religious parents that they can't teach religion to their kids, which would be like their greatest fear, which is actually what they think
that's what they think is going to happen.
They think that's what you, and more to the point, the universities and Hollywood and the cultural influencers, they think that's what they're trying to do. 100%. They may not be wrong about that, but in terms of like you as a person and an individual, which is on the level that I think all of this really matters, you're actually going to try and have a dialogue with them. you're actually going to try to sit down with them and make your case and make your rational arguments. And they may walk away from it going, well, I still feel under attack.
Yeah.
You might not convince them that you're not trying to attack them. The thing is, this is what I'm saying, that it's kind of a paradox, because your ideal world exists. You want to exist in a world in which there's no religion, essentially. So while you're like, basically you're the Tim Keller, except you're an atheist, right? You're like, I'm not gonna protest your religious gatherings on Sunday, but I'm going to talk to my Christian pastor friend on a podcast and try to make persuasive, compelling arguments that you should change what you think because it's harmful and bad.
Yeah, I think much more atheists are on the Tim Keller side of winsomeness than the Bob Jones University side of
right.
Whatever. Which partially is why we lost the courts. Because we're like doing our thing, and the religious right, they figured it out.
Yeah. I guess it just depends on how useful you think war is.
Well, I think on that.
Yeah.
I know we talked about some hard things. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, comments, concerns. If you're... Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't lose the other half of my audience.
I mean, I don't think you did.
This is the thing. I don't feel a particular need to defend conservative Christians.
Right.
I actually just think, for the sake of like podcast discussion, it's better if there's tension. But also, like, I don't want to overstep my bounds of where I feel qualified to speak. I don't actually feel qualified to speak scientifically about genetics or biology. Yeah. So I just kind of roll with my common sense knowledge.
Well, and I think I blindsided you a little bit, not meaning to. Just
it's fine. I just want to say that like, at the end of the day, I, as an individual, really actually look at every human being as that's the basic thing about them, that's the only thing about them that really, not the only thing, but that's the thing that matters most in terms of how they ought to be treated ethically. And hopefully we're all having a conversation on that level. I think Christians think they're having a conversation on that level, but it's loaded by how they think the Bible is defining what it means to be human.
Yeah. And
so, because that's their bias, in the eyes of their progressive neighbors, they can't ever, in 2023, they have to take bigoted stances or not believe.
Yeah.
And I think that that statement alone is an equal opportunity offender of both progressive Christians and conservative Christians.
So maybe you did lose the other half.
I just said progressive Christians don't follow the Bible and conservative Christians are bigots. That's what I just said.
I feel that's the whole point of my podcast. Yeah. Our I shouldn't say my podcast.
Yeah.
I think with that, any parting words? That's it.
That's it. We love you.
Have a great week.